غارة إسرائيلية عنيفة.
Black smoke billows. Caked in dust, survivors emerge. We were just going to get some flour, this boy says. These nightmarish scenes captured by Al Jazeera as Israeli forces once again attack Al-Shifa hospital and the surrounding area. It's shameful, this woman cries out. Israel said it killed a senior Hamas operative hiding at the hospital and that attacks on soldiers had been launched from the compound. Palestinians say the man was the head of police and had been helping coordinate aid deliveries in Gaza. An Al Jazeera journalist, Ismail Al-Ghul, was amongst those detained. Local journalists working with us have been filming inside Al-Shifa over the past few days. Israeli forces took it over last year, alleging a Hamas command and control center lay underneath it. No evidence of that has been produced, and after the soldiers withdrew, doctors began treating patients once more. Amongst them, 16-year-old Rafiq and his younger sister Rafif. Both have had amputations after being hit by an Israeli strike that killed their siblings and their mother.
My mother was more than just a mother. She was a sister, a friend. She was everything. I wish she could come back, because when I lost her, I lost my life.
Carrying the pain of his grief, whilst his frail body writhes in agony. Rafiq is also suffering from malnutrition, but doctors don't have the right medicine or food to help him recover.
I feel an unnatural pain because the shrapnel that hit me in the back tore the muscles, so they had to give me a colostomy bag.
When I need a painkiller and they can't provide it, I curl up and bite my teeth until I sleep and feel the pain gradually fading away.
Somehow Rafif still manages to smile, but she knows they both need to find a way out of Gaza to access the treatment they need.
Please get us out of here, because this place is no longer Gaza. It's no longer a land to live or breathe in.
We don't know what's happened to the siblings after today's raid. The Israeli military released its own footage from inside Al-Shifa. The defense minister said soldiers had turned the hospital into a death trap for terrorists and that 20 gunmen had been killed. Facing international criticism, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu today vowed to continue the war, even as a delegation arrived in Qatar for talks on a ceasefire.
How do we define victory? We define it as the destruction of Hamas's military and governing capability. We define it also as the return of the hostages, which we're working right now, because this is a war of civilization against barbarism.
But many Israelis are growing increasingly frustrated with Netanyahu's government for not having reached an agreement already.
Are you in favor of a deal, even if it means stopping the war and leaving Hamas still in Gaza?
They do horrible things and they are not legitimate, they're terrorists. But first thing, our moral, the duty is to bring back home the women, the young men, the older men, everyone. This is number one.
In Gaza, starvation is spreading at unprecedented speed. Today, a warning from international monitors that famine is likely to occur within the next 2 months, and that more and more people will die from hunger. You can see the desperation at this soup kitchen in northern Gaza, where the situation is most dire. Israel is accused of using access to aid as a weapon of war. There are no vegetables, and the prices are very expensive here. Even if we have carrots or potatoes or eggplants, The prices are so high in northern Gaza. Sometimes obtaining them requires risking our lives. Israel denies blocking humanitarian access, but aid agencies, even its closest international allies, have criticized Israel's refusal to open more routes into Gaza. Some aid has now reached the north. Famine can be averted, but only if much, much more is allowed through.
Well, Secunda joins me now from Tel Aviv. Secunda.
Well, Jackie, this report on levels of hunger in Gaza makes for very grim reading. I mean, according to it, around 2/3 of people in northern Gaza are regularly going days and nights without eating. And the food that is available for sale in northern Gaza has massively increased in price. Israel says it insists that it's not to blame, but that's not really how pretty much the entire rest of the world sees it. And you can sense the frustration even in the United States. The National Security Advisor there, Jake Sullivan, has been talking after a conversation between President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu. He said that a major ground offensive in Rafah, as Netanyahu has vowed to carry out, would be a major mistake that would deepen the anarchy there is in Gaza. And he's also said that Netanyahu has agreed to send a team to Washington to discuss any operation in Rafah. But what we've not yet seen from America is any willingness, at least in public certainly, to leverage the huge amount of military aid it gives Israel. There is some talk about the possibility of a slowing down of ammunition sales. Of course, many people around the world would like to see America go much further than that. As for the ceasefire talks, they are now expected to get underway in Qatar, but Israeli officials here are briefing the media that they're not optimistic.
Secunda, thanks very much. Well, joining me now from Jerusalem is Israeli Knesset member Boaz Bismuth, who is a member of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's Likud party. Thanks very much for joining us this evening. Half the population in Gaza is facing catastrophic levels of hunger. Famine is imminent in the north. I just wonder how concerned you are about that situation.
Good evening, and thank you very much for inviting me. I listened. I looked at the report, and I listened carefully. And let's talk about facts. 17,000 trucks have entered Gaza, humanitarian aid. You know the planes that are coming with humanitarian aid from the air, now from the sea with the American idea of the port, that of course Israel said yes, of course, and the trucks that I've said by myself entering Gaza. So what does it mean? That Israel, on the contrary, from day one of this war in Gaza, but I have to remind you also why it started, because of the massacre of the 7th of October, always said, and this is how we do the war, with of course respecting international law and applying, of course, humanitarian aid. This was done from day one. But I would like to ask you a question. Can you talk to me? I have any questions concerning starvation among our hostages? We're not even visited yet, 134. But this,
exactly, I believe that this concerns you less. Yes. We have spoken many times and covered the situation of the hostages, spoken to their families throughout this since October. I asked you a question about whether you have any concern about people starving to death in Gaza.
So my answer was about
by the fact that northern Gaza is facing famine.
Jackie, I do believe that if our country, if Israel respects humanitarian aid, and I can show you the numbers, I mean, again, I can say it again, 17,000 trucks from the beginning of the war. What does it mean? It means that we're at war against terrorists, not against population. And when you mentioned before Israel operating in Rafah, I mean, Israel will do so only after evacuating population. And this is what we've done. All the places we operate.
I'm sorry to cut across you, but I'm still waiting to hear whether you have a level of concern about huge numbers of people potentially starving to death. But on the idea that Israel is allowing sufficient aid in, that is simply not accepted. In today's report, it says aid crossings continue to be hindered by crossing closures, access denials, onerous vetting procedures. The charity Oxfam says Israeli authorities are not only failing to facilitate the aid, but are actively hindering it.
Unfortunately, I mean, reality is exactly the opposite. On the contrary, if you would come to Israel, you would see so many, for example, families of hostages who feel so frustrated, as many Israelis, where you know, for example, that medicine did not arrive to our hostages. Red Cross did not see our hostages yet. we respect humanitarian aid, and this is exactly what is happening. Now, it's not because you said it 4 times that it is true. I can answer it 4, 5, 6 times and tell you that, again, 17,000 trucks have entered. Aid is coming from the air, from the sea, and wherever is needed.
The EU foreign policy chief, foreign policy chief says Israel is using starvation as a weapon of war.
He can say whatever he wants, but this is so untrue. Look, I want to tell you one thing. One thing that, for me is, how would I say, unbearable. You know, we were attacked on the 7th of October. We never wanted this war. On the contrary, we were giving humanitarian aid to Gaza even before the 7th of October. Those people were butchered.
Is the level of starvation that people in Gaza, is the level of starvation that people in Gaza...
You please respect my answer. People
I just would
that
like to
were butchered
understand,
are
is the
people
level of
that were giving
starvation
aid.
people are facing acceptable because of what happened?
All the responsibility of what is happening in Gaza right now, madam, is due to Hamas. You know that this war and starvation that you call that, of course, we're not responsible, and we do our best in order to make sure that population is not suffering, and this is why we allow humanitarian aid, and we're doing it from day one. Yet, this war, and President Biden said it himself, this war can be over in exactly 1 minute and 30 seconds if Hamas stops the war, gives up, of course, leaves Gaza, and brings back our hostages, and the war is over.
If I may, a couple of months ago, you spoke, I saw an interview you did talking about how much support you had from across the West. The truth is that support is waning, isn't it? You have the EU senior diplomat accusing you of starving people as a weapon of war. Israel's greatest friend, the US, Senate leader Chuck Schumer, saying Israel should hold elections to replace your leader, Mr. Netanyahu. You're losing friends, aren't you?
So I will ask you a question in return. Between Israel, yes, a democratic country that has 134 hostages, and Hamas on the other side, would you tell me that you're on the side of Hamas? Are you on the side of terrorists? Would you be on the side of Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, ISIS? Because this is how I interpreted your question. Madam, we're on a war right now, which is the most justified war in the world. We have 134 hostages over there. Now, before being a member of parliament, I used to be a journalist myself. I covered wars. I covered wars in Iraq. I covered wars in Afghanistan. I covered wars also in Europe, in Kosovo. Believe me, the fact that you had civilians never prevented Europeans or Americans to make war. Not in Mosul, not in Rafah, not in Kosovo itself. So with all due respect, Israel has also the right to defend itself, and that's exactly what we're doing. We are intending obtaining two objectives. We shall bring back our hostages, and we shall evacuate and clean Gaza from terrorists.
Thank you very much for talking to us this evening.
Thank you very much for